can see a lot of faces out there. Thank you so much, Santosh, for asking me to come tonight to speak today, though I know that there are many people out here probably much more better qualified to speak than I am. But I do feel extremely moved to be here and to have listened to some of the stories which have been told earlier. You know, there are certain things that we all have to think about very deeply because, as somebody mentioned earlier, we do tend to put the whole blame of violence on a very patriarchal system. I have been very disturbed for the last few days because one of the most violent and abusive stories that have been coming out of Delhi, I don't know if any one of you follow the newspapers, is of a woman brutalizing her house help. Extremely badly, and this is an educated woman who has broken their limbs, who has burnt their hair, burnt them with iron, made them crawl on the floor, asking for food, made them eat food out of a dustbin. And this is an educated woman who is doing this, the wife of a politician. So, you know, it makes me wonder that is power what makes the difference? You know, is anybody in a powerful situation capable of extreme violence against another human being? And what do we have to do in order to protect ourselves? I don't know if any one of you have been ever in a Delhi bus. Can you just raise your hands? Okay, so that's about 10 of you, and I can add myself to that number. It's a very different kind of experience, I can assure you, to what you experience here in the tube or the subway, because you get a very quick lesson in the male anatomy, you know. And that's exactly what happened to me as a schoolgirl when I used to go in buses or when I used to travel for work later on. It's horrible. I cannot tell you how demeaning it is. It is not violation. I mean, it's not violence, but it is a kind of a violation of you. And what upset me again this time was when I was talking to a young girl who didn't want to go to school. She's only 14. And she told me that she has to go in the metro. The metro is very much like the tube out here. And she wears a skirt and a blazer, that's her school uniform. And the other day there was this guy who just came and pressed himself into her from behind. And she just refuses to go to school anymore because she says, I just don't want to do it. Now these are the normal, everyday kind of violent behavior that we experience in India. And I do want to make a special mention of it because it is not just husbands beating up their wives. It's just the day-to-day business of life in India, which can be extremely humiliating if you are not empowered, if you are somehow the victim of this, and if you cannot, the worst of all, you cannot retaliate. And a lot of women don't because of a huge issue of shame, which I do hope the Asian Circle will address, you know, somehow take this sense of shame away. But yes, a great amount of the violence is because of the men. I mean, let's just face it, you know, Indian men are perhaps frustrated, maybe sexually immature. I mean, we don't know. Why do they feel that they have to treat a woman extremely badly, almost like an animal, which came out during some of the, the gang rape cases, which, during the trials. When they saw this girl in that factory, in that isolated factory, I don't know if you followed the Mumbai rape case at all, when they saw this girl coming in alone, they said, he called up his friend, one of the rapists called up his friend and said, come, I've spotted a deer, a beautiful deer. So women are not, they're not human, they're basically, we're all animals. I mean, that's what we are. So to begin with, let's also look at the fact that all societies are violent towards women. Somewhere in the history of the great and wonderful United Kingdom, there has been a lot of violence that has been done to women here as well, and we know it. That's why you had to have a women's movement here. You had to have a very extremely, I would say, even a violent women's movement in order to grab that freedom back. In India, what happened was that when we look at the freedom struggle, which was the one time when men learned the whole tool of fighting, you know, in an organized fashion. They learned how to fight against the British. Ironically, a lot of the men who fought against the British had been educated here. They learned the ways of fighting, of getting organized, and then they went back and they fought for their freedom. The women in that freedom movement played, unfortunately, a fairly marginal role. They were the supportive caste. They were not really out there. They were doing their bit to support the men. But I think we have to understand that the education that the men got during this freedom struggle was not the education that the women got. What they got instead was the fact that, yes, we got a woman prime minister very soon after that. Our third prime minister was a woman, but what did she do? Did she make it any easier or any simpler? Did she put gender on the table? No, she didn't. So I think there have been very many opportunities lost where Indian women have not learned the power, have not learned the ability to grab power, have not learned the ability to be organized. And I think that is something which I do hope, again, that the Asian Circle will examine. What are the tools? How do you teach them? You know, so this is not like education that you get in school, but this is really hardcore political education, which I think every woman in India needs today. Now let's look at what some of the people have discussed earlier, which is the whole issue of why do women become so helpless? There are two issues here. One is, of course, their sexuality, you know, which is what makes us victims very often. And the other is our reproductive, you know, abilities, which is why, as you know, has been mentioned earlier, women have child after child, which is extremely debilitating. Again, if we look historically, and I want to just talk about the present generation. Why has the present generation reached where it is today, and why is there so much violence, and why is there no sense of understanding of what a woman really wants and what her needs are? So in the 70s, if you look at, that's when Indira Gandhi, the woman prime minister, is there, and that's when a huge sterilization drive happened. I don't know if anyone of you remember that. That was horrible. It was when men were forcibly taken for what was called nasbandi, you know, because it was decided that one of the problems of India was poverty, and the poverty came from the population, the huge explosion of population in the country, which is quite true. Possibly the two things were linked, but this was definitely not the way to do it. This was not the way to do it at all. It was to drag people and to forcibly sterilize them. It had a terrible impact on the women ultimately, because there was such a backlash later. Subsequent governments were so sort of, you know, worried about taking on the whole issue of contraception, of family planning, that instead of leading them towards modernization, about telling them about how they could possibly control their own, you know, reproductive, you know, sort of abilities, and ensure that they have smaller families, which would have given them a chance to get into jobs, into education. And all of that was like totally abandoned. So for a long time there was silence on that. So women who had for almost decades become just a baby producing machine, so that eventually they would have that boy. You know, that was what everybody was aiming for, was that great and glorious son that would arrive. So when this I'm talking about in the 70s, and then later on in the 80s, we came across another wonderful technique, which was, of course, the ultrasound machines which came into India, which allowed women to actually go in for scans and to ensure that they didn't have to produce baby after baby after baby. They could just very quickly select the boys and they would be born. And so what happened? You had a whole generation which got completely skewed. You have now a highly imbalanced problem of gender in India, where there are, according to some estimates, over 35 million more men than women in India today. So obviously there is going to be a lot of pressure on society in general, because all relationships are going to get skewed when a woman is looked upon as just a means for producing a child, which is of the male sex. And most of the time, ordinary girls who go out, are looked upon as a target for men who are highly frustrated because there are just not enough women for them to have a normal relationship with. Now, these are issues that you have to look upon when you want to think about why is India turning into such a violent society. Yes, there is a lot of testosterone out there, and yes, there is a lot, therefore, of, cases of gang rape, because most men do not have anymore a normal relationship with women. Now, I do want to say that the violence that exists in India can be of many kinds. So we need to also expand the way in which we describe violence. I've spoken about a particular kind of violence, but there is also violence which is of just turning a blind eye to the needs of the girl. She needs to go to school. She needs to get a job. She needs to go out there and just do the normal day-to-day functioning that she has to do. But when she wants to go to school, you don't even have things like toilets, so that girls automatically drop out. I find that that is also the sign of a very violent society that does not even consider what are the needs of a girl.